Good. I don't need to see her.
The elders advise that you at least...
I said it's done. I signed it for power.
As you wish, my king.
And just like that, it was decided. A marriage without sight, without care, without choice. Don't let him touch her. The warning tore through the hall, but it came too late. Ronan's hand had already closed around his bride's. Everything stopped. Not the music, not the crowd, not the flickering torchlight along the stone walls. Him. His wolf did not rise. It did not surge forward in dominance. It did not claim her. It froze. A sharp, unnatural stillness locked through his body, silencing instinct, power, control. Then, suddenly, it dropped. Not to him. To her. Ronan's breath caught hard in his throat as something deep inside him recoiled, violent and unfamiliar. A crushing force slammed against his chest as if his own strength had turned against him. Wrong. This was wrong. His grip tightened instinctively around her hand, holding on without understanding why, as if letting go would make whatever this was spiral beyond control. The girl standing before him looked like nothing. No visible power, no commanding presence, no reason for this reaction. Her fingers were cold, trembling slightly within his hold. Her head remained lowered, strands of dark hair falling across her face, hiding her completely. She looked small, ordinary, easily overlooked. And yet, his wolf was afraid of her. A ripple moved through the hall, subtle at first, then growing. Low murmurs spread, uneven and tense. Warriors shifted where they stood. Nobles exchanged glances they did not dare voice. The elders had gone still. Too still. Like men who had just watched something they had spent years praying would never happen. It's her. The whisper barely existed, but it traveled fast, slipping from one voice to another. It can't be. After all these years. Why now? Ronan's golden eyes sharpened as he lowered his gaze to the woman in front of him, something darker flickering beneath the surface. Look at me. His voice was low, controlled, but no longer calm. For a moment, she didn't move. Then, slowly, she lifted her head, and the moment their eyes met, something ancient cracked open. It was not the recognition of a normal mate bond, not the instinctive pull of desire or possession. It was deeper, older. His wolf did not surge forward. It did not fight. It did not even breathe. It recognized her, and it remembered. Pain tore through Ronan's chest without warning, sharp and consuming. His grip tightened as the force of it nearly buckled his knees. Heat and cold collided under his skin as something locked into place with absolute finality. The bond, forming, without his consent, without his command. Impossible. He had not chosen her. He had not even seen her before this moment. This marriage was supposed to be simple, a political move, a calculated decision to secure alliances, strengthen his rule, silence opposition. Nothing more. The prophecy. The words slipped into the silence. Quiet, but undeniable. Ronan's gaze snapped toward the elders, his expression darkening. What prophecy? No one answered. No one wanted to be the one to confirm it. An elder finally stepped forward, his movements stiff, his face drained of color. If the alpha bonds with her, he hesitated. The pack will fall. The words didn't echo. They sank. Heavy, final, unavoidable. Ronan looked back at his bride, at the woman still standing in front of him, silent, unreadable, at the woman his wolf had already accepted, not with dominance, not with desire, but with fear. And for the first time since becoming Alpha King, he felt it. Not doubt, not hesitation, certainty. He had just made a mistake he could never undo. and he didn't even know her name. To understand why the Alpha King signed the marriage contract blindly, and how that single decision bound him to the one woman meant to destroy his pack, we have to go back. Not to the moment the contract was signed, but to the moment her name was first spoken. And why, the instant it was, every elder in that room went silent, like they had just heard something they were never supposed to hear again. Before we go further, quick question. How are you feeling right now? Because if you're already here, it means something about this story pulled you in, and I need to make sure you're with me before everything starts unfolding. Thank you for being here. It genuinely means a lot. And if this story is already pulling at you the way I think it is, then do me a favor. Support the channel by hitting that subscribe button, liking the video, and dropping a comment telling me where you're watching from. It helps more than you think, and it tells me you want more stories like this. All right. Now, let's go back. Back to the moment the Alpha King made a decision that would change everything he thought he understood about loyalty, power, and fate itself. The war chamber was cold in a way that had nothing to do with temperature. Stone walls, carved with ancient runes of conquest, absorbed every trace of sound until even breathing felt like something that did not belong. Ronan stood at the long table with his hands behind his back, posture straight, expression unreadable. On the table before him lay a single document, thick parchment, sealed with the marks of 3 powerful houses already bound by agreement. The ink was still fresh in places, as if the decision had been made in haste, or more accurately, as if it had been made without him. An elder cleared his throat carefully. This union will secure the Southern Alliance completely. No further resistance from the border pacts. It is the final piece, Your Majesty. Ronan didn't look at him. His gaze remained on the contract. And the bride? Another voice asked cautiously, slower this time, as if the question itself carried risk. A pause stretched. Not long, just enough to make it uncomfortable. Ronan finally spoke. A formality. The word landed flat, final, as if it ended the discussion before it could even begin. The elders exchanged subtle glances but said nothing. That was how it always was with him. Ronan did not negotiate emotions. He eliminated them. You do not wish to review her lineage? One elder tried again, more carefully this time. That made him pause, not out of curiosity, but irritation. Slowly, Ronan tilted his head just slightly. If her lineage mattered to me, I would already know it. Silence followed immediately. No one dared speak after that. He reached forward, took the pen, and signed. The movement was precise, controlled, absolute. No hesitation, no second thought. The ink spread across the parchment like a sealed fate, binding a woman he had never seen to a future he had no intention of questioning. When he set the pen down, the sound echoed faintly through the chamber, louder than it should have. Outside, far beyond the stone walls, thunder rolled across the kingdom, but no one inside reacted to it, as if something deeper than weather had just shifted. She arrived without announcement. No banners lined the path, no ceremonial escort followed her steps, no noble house stood at the gates waiting to claim her arrival with pride. It was as if the kingdom itself had agreed, silently, not to acknowledge her presence. The carriage stopped at the outer gates of the palace with a quiet creak of wood and iron. The guards hesitated before opening it, not because they were unsure of protocol, but because something about the moment felt wrong, like opening a door that should have remained closed. Inside, Lena sat alone. Still, not trembling, not resisting, just still, as if she had learned long ago that movement changed nothing. Her hands rested in her lap, fingers lightly pressed together, knuckles pale from restraint rather than fear. She wore no royal insignia, no mark of noble lineage that could command respect. Her dress was simple, almost deliberately plain, the fabric too clean for a world that clearly did not want her to shine in it. One of the guards leaned slightly toward the other. "Is that really her?" he muttered under his breath. The other did not answer immediately, because neither of them knew. Or worse, they knew enough not to ask further. Lena stepped down from the carriage slowly, carefully, as if testing whether the ground would accept her weight or reject it. Her feet touched stone. No reaction followed, no welcome, no acknowledgement, only silence. Her eyes lifted briefly toward the towering palace walls ahead. She did not search for admiration. She did not look for belonging. There was none expected. Somewhere behind the gates, servants hurried out of sight, not to greet her but to avoid her. Whispers began almost immediately, slipping through corridors and behind pillars, not of excitement, not of honor, but of confusion. Why her? Why now? Why someone like that? The great hall had been prepared for union, but what it held felt nothing like celebration. Torches burned along the walls, casting long shadows that shifted with every flicker of flame. Nobles stood in rigid lines along the sides, faces carefully neutral, eyes sharp with judgment. Above them, the elders sat elevated on carved stone seats, watching everything without expression, like men observing something they already expected to fail. There was no music, no ceremonial chants, no blessing of union. Only silence stretched across the hall like a pressure that grew heavier with every passing second. Ronan stood at the center, unmoving, cloaked in black armor trimmed with silver markings that signified authority, dominance, and the kind of power that did not need to announce itself twice. He did not look at the crowd. He did not look at the elders. He did not look at anything that did not serve him. Then Lena was brought forward, not escorted, not guided with care, simply positioned into place, as if her role in this moment was not to participate, but to stand where she was told. She stopped several steps away from him, not out of defiance, not out of hesitation, but because something in the air itself warned her not to come closer too quickly. Ronan finally looked at her, just once, a single, brief glance. No recognition, no curiosity, no softness, as if she were already irrelevant to him beyond the contract he had signed. "Proceed," he said. The word cut through the hall. The ceremony began, but nothing about it felt alive. It was mechanical, a process being completed rather than a union being formed. When the instruction came for them to join hands, there was a pause, barely noticeable, but present. Lena lifted her hand first, not boldly, not confidently, just quietly, as if accepting what she had no power to refuse. Ronan took it. The moment their skin touched, the entire hall changed, but not visibly. It was subtle, a pressure shift, a silence that deepened instead of breaking, a sensation that something unseen had just reacted. Ronan did not move, did not speak, but deep inside him something stirred. Not desire, not recognition, something far more unsettling, awareness. And beneath it, something that felt like warning. The ceremony was supposed to continue without interruption. Every movement had been planned, every step rehearsed by tradition older than the kingdom itself. When Ronan reached for Lena's hand, it was not meant to mean anything beyond completion. A signal, a seal, a final acknowledgement of political order. But the moment their skin touched, everything collapsed into something no law, no tradition, no king had ever prepared for. It did not start outside. It started inside him. A sudden violent shock rippled through his system, not like pain exactly, but like something fundamental inside him had been struck at its core. His breath stalled instantly, chest tightening as if an unseen force had grabbed hold of his ribs and squeezed without mercy. His fingers instinctively closed around hers, but not out of control over her, but out of control over himself. His wolf reacted first, not with instinctive dominance, not with recognition, but with rejection so sharp it felt like a rupture, a tearing sensation deep in his consciousness, like two ancient forces colliding inside one body that was never meant to contain both reactions at once. Lena didn't react outwardly. She didn't pull away. She didn't tighten her grip either. Her hand simply remained there, warm, steady, human, completely unaware that her presence alone had just destabilized the alphaking. Ronan's golden eyes flickered, his jaw tightening as his control fractured in small, invisible cracks. The hall around them remained still, unaware of the war breaking beneath his skin. But inside him, something was no longer listening to him. Something deeper than thought, deeper than command, deeper than identity had just reacted to her. And it was not obedience. It was resistance. Ronan had never experienced disobedience from his wolf. It was not something that existed in his understanding of himself. From the first shift, from the first instinctual rise of power within him, his wolf had always been aligned with him, unyielding, dominant, absolute. Even in battle, even in rage, even in moments where control should have been tested, it had never once broken from his authority. But now, inside the ceremonial hall filled with watching eyes and silent judgment, something unthinkable was happening. His wolf did not rise to protect him. It did not assert dominance over the situation. It did not even acknowledge him as its center. Instead, it went still, not calm stillness, not controlled stillness. A forced stillness, like something had pressed its hand over instinct itself and silenced it. Ronan's breathing became uneven as he tried to regain control, but the more he pushed inward, the more distant his wolf felt, as if it had shifted its attention entirely away from him. And then came the second fracture, submission, not toward Ronan's will, not toward his authority, but toward Lena. It was not dramatic. It was not visible. It was worse than that. It was absolute, a quiet internal lowering, like something ancient inside him had recognized a presence that did not belong to the hierarchy of alpha and pack at all. Ronan's expression hardened slightly, though no one in the hall could tell why. His grip on Lena's hand remained firm, but internally, something was slipping. "Stop," he muttered under his breath, not even realizing he had spoken aloud. But there was no response from within, no correction, no obedience. For the first time in his life, his wolf did not answer him. And worse, it was afraid, not of him, not of battle, not of death, of her. Lena stood beside him, completely unaware, her posture still modest, almost fragile, like someone who had been placed into a world she did not belong to. But something about that perception no longer matched what Ronan was feeling. Because inside him, something was no longer treating her as fragile at all. It was treating her as something dangerous in a way he could not yet understand. The ceremony continued, but Ronan was no longer present in it. Words were spoken by elders, rituals continued with precision, but they all moved past him like noise, without meaning. His attention had narrowed completely, locked onto the woman beside him as if she had become the only fixed point in a shifting world. Lena's hand remained in his, still steady, still quiet. But now he was aware of it in a way he could not explain, not as touch, not as connection, as recognition without memory. Slowly, Ronan looked at her again, not briefly this time, but fully, properly, as if forcing his mind to resolve something it refused to name. Her face was calm, too calm for someone standing beside an alpha whose presence alone made entire rooms instinctively tense. There was nothing outwardly remarkable about her, nothing that should linger in memory. And yet it did. Not as clarity, as distortion, a sensation that something about her should not feel new. Ronan's jaw tightened slightly. His mind searched without permission, pulling through every moment he could recall with perfect precision. Every war, every alliance, every face he had ever encountered. Nothing matched her, and still the feeling persisted. Wrong, not unfamiliar, not unknown. Wrong in a way that suggested forgetting rather than absence. "Look at me," he said suddenly, his voice lower than before, controlled but no longer detached. Lena hesitated for the first time. Slowly, she lifted her gaze. And the moment their eyes met again, that same fracture reopened, but deeper this time. Because this time, it was not only his wolf reacting, it was something inside his memory. A flicker. Not image. Not scene. A sensation. Cold air. Stone. A voice he could not place. A presence standing where she now stood. Ronan's breath slowed without permission as something uncomfortable settled in his chest. Familiarity without origin. Recognition without proof. And the worst part, his instincts were not rejecting it. They were trying to protect him from remembering it. Behind them, the ceremony reached its final stages, completely unaware that the union had already moved beyond ritual. Because whatever had just begun between Ronan and Lena was no longer governed by the laws of the pack. It was governed by something older, and something that had already seen them before. It started as a silence that did not belong to the hall. Even after the ceremony continued, even after the elders resumed their formal words, something had changed in the way the room felt. Not visibly, not loudly, but undeniably. Eyes began to shift not toward the ceremony, but toward Ronan and the girl beside him. Whispers that had once been uncertain now carried weight, as if recognition had begun forming in places where denial had lived before. One of the older elders, seated high above the hall, narrowed his eyes slowly. His hand tightened around his staff, not in support, but in instinctive warning. "No," he muttered under his breath, barely audible even to those closest to him. Another elder beside him turned slightly. "You see it too," the first whispered. Not a question. A confirmation they both feared. The air around Lena felt unchanged to most, but not to those who remembered stories they were never meant to repeat. Old stories. Buried stories. Ones spoken only in warning, never in truth. That presence, the elder continued slowly, voice thinning. It was described before, long before this kingdom took its current form. Down below, Ronan remained still, unaware that attention was no longer divided between ceremony and contract. It had shifted entirely to what stood beside him. Lena was not reacting. Not visibly. She stood as she had since the beginning, quiet, lowered gaze, controlled stillness, but that silence no longer read as weakness to those watching closely. It read differently now. Like something being held back, something that should not be awake yet. And for the first time, the elders were no longer watching Ronan. They were watching her. The final part of the ceremony required acknowledgement, a binding gesture meant to seal political marriage into law recognized by both Wolf and Council. It was supposed to be symbolic, controlled, predictable. Ronan raised his hand slightly, as tradition demanded, expecting the ritual to complete itself without consequence. But the moment he did, something inside him reacted again, faster this time. Not with resistance, but with urgency. His wolf surged forward violently, not breaking free, but pushing toward the surface as if drawn by something beyond instinct. Ronan's breath tightened. "Stop!" he ordered internally, forcing control down, trying to reassert dominance over his own power. But it was already too late. The bond did not wait for consent. It did not wait for structure. It did not wait for authority. It formed, not through ritual, not through intention, but through contact that should not have carried that meaning yet. A faint pressure ignited between them, not visible, but deeply felt. Lena's hand twitched slightly in his, her expression unchanged, but something in her posture shifted subtly, as if she had felt it too without understanding what it was. Ronan's eyes darkened instantly. "This is not supposed to happen yet," one of the elders said sharply, rising halfway from his seat. Panic had begun to replace observation. "The marking phase requires alignment, not instability," another elder added, voice tightening. But what they were witnessing did not follow their laws. The connection between Ronan and Lena did not stabilize. It deepened, as if the bond had decided for itself that waiting was no longer necessary. Ronan finally turned his head slightly toward her, his jaw tight, voice low. "What are you?" The question wasn't meant for ceremony. It wasn't meant for the court. It was meant for the unknown force, tightening around his instincts. Lena did not answer. But for the first time, something in her silence felt less like emptiness and more like restraint. The hall did not fall into silence immediately. It happened in layers. First, confusion, then tension, then recognition of something no one wanted to fully accept. An elder slowly rose from his seat, hands trembling slightly as they gripped the carved stone in front of him. His eyes did not leave Lena, not even for a second. "It cannot be coincidence," he said slowly, voice strained by something closer to fear than authority. Another elder turned sharply. "Do not say it here." But it was already too late. The words had already begun forming in the space between them, the memory of something long buried, long denied, long dismissed as myth. The elder who had risen swallowed hard before speaking again, his voice breaking the controlled order of the hall. The old inscription, the one sealed before the first Alpha throne was established. Ronan's gaze shifted slightly at that, not fully turning, but listening now, properly listening. "It spoke of a bride," the elder continued, "not born to destroy the pack, but to reveal what the pack was built upon." A pause followed, heavy, final. "She will not bring ruin," the elder said finally, voice barely holding together. "She will expose it." The hall changed instantly, not in sound but in perception, because exposure was worse than destruction. Destruction ended things. Exposure revealed why they should never have existed the way they did. Ronan's grip on Lena tightened slightly without him realizing it. Not possessively, not protectively, but instinctively, like something inside him had just been told that everything he knew might not survive what was coming next. And for the first time since the contract was signed, Lena finally looked up at him again. Not in fear, not in confusion, but with something far harder to read. Awareness. As if she had just heard that prophecy before and chose not to deny it. The order did not come from the elders at first. It came from silence. A silence so heavy, it felt like the hall itself had begun to decide her fate without speaking it aloud. Ronan stood at the center of it, still holding Lena's hand, though he no longer remembered when he had tightened his grip. Around him, the council had shifted subtle at first, then unmistakable. Warriors who once stood at ease now angled their bodies inward, forming a loose circle of containment rather than ceremony. Not protection. Not respect. Control. One of the elders finally broke the silence, voice carefully measured but carrying the weight of fear disguised as authority. "Your Majesty, the signs are no longer theoretical." Ronan did not respond immediately. His gaze remained fixed forward, but nothing in his expression belonged to the man they thought they controlled. "Signs," he repeated quietly. The word alone carried something dangerous. Another elder stepped forward, older, more fragile, but more certain in his fear. The bond formed too early. The wolf reacted incorrectly. The prophecy is no longer dormant. A pause, then the words that changed the air in the room. She must be eliminated before the connection stabilizes. The hall did not react outwardly, but something in it tightened instantly, like a room suddenly sealed with no exit. Ronan's fingers shifted slightly against Lena's hand. Not a squeeze, not comfort, calculation. For the first time since the contract was signed, the decision in front of him was not political. It was survival. If she lived, something unknown would grow between them. If she died, something inside him might never recover from what had already started. Lena stood still beside him, still silent, still unreadable, but no longer unaware. Her breathing had changed, slight, controlled, as if she had heard everything and simply chosen not to interrupt it. Ronan finally spoke, voice low enough that only those closest to him could hear. "And if you are wrong?" No one answered immediately, because no one could afford to be wrong. And in that silence, the truth settled into place. If she stayed alive, the pack risked its future. If she died, the Alpha might lose something no one had ever seen him lose before: control. They expected her to break. That was the first mistake. When Lena was escorted, not dragged, not carried, but positioned into the inner chamber for questioning, the room itself seemed smaller, as if it refused to accept what she represented. There were no chains. There were no restraints. There was only presence. Ronan stood across from her, no longer in ceremonial armor but in something simpler, more dangerous. Close enough to end things if necessary, far enough to observe what kind of ending she would bring. "Do you understand what is being decided outside this room?" he asked. His voice was steady, but not gentle. Lena looked at him for a long moment before answering. Yes, only that. No fear, no pleading, no attempt to soften herself. Just acknowledgement. One of the guards shifted uncomfortably behind her. Most would be begging by now. Someone muttered under their breath. Lena didn't turn. "Begging changes nothing," she said quietly. The room tightened at that. Ronan's gaze sharpened slightly. "And what do you think changes something?" he asked. Lena held his eyes now, directly, for the first time since her arrival. "Truth," she said. That single word landed differently than expected, not because it was powerful, but because it was calm. Too calm. Ronan studied her carefully now, as if trying to find where fear should exist. It wasn't there. Not even when his wolf stirred faintly at the back of his mind, reacting again, not violently this time, but uncertainly. Like something inside him was no longer sure who stood on the other side of the room. For the first time, Lena did not feel like a subject under judgment. She felt like someone who had already survived something worse than judgment. It did not begin with an attack. It began with movement that should not have been there. Guards shifted positions that had not been ordered. Doors that were meant to remain sealed were found slightly ajar. Communication between elder houses began breaking down in ways that could not be explained through coincidence alone. Ronan noticed it before anyone dared report it. That was the difference between him and those who served under him. He did not wait for confirmation. He followed disruption. "Someone inside the palace is coordinating," one of his commanders said carefully. Ronan stood by the high window overlooking the inner courtyard, expression unreadable. "Not someone," he corrected quietly. "Multiple." The commander hesitated. "From which side?" Ronan's eyes narrowed slightly. That was the wrong question. Because by now, it was no longer about sides. It was about alignment. "Find who is afraid of her," he said instead. A pause. "That will tell you who is moving first." Behind him, Lena stood silently in the corridor, not officially part of the meeting, but no longer outside its consequences. She was becoming the center of decisions she had never requested to be part of, and that, more than anything, was what made her dangerous to the system around her. Because systems did not collapse from enemies outside. They collapsed when something inside stopped obeying. The assassination attempt did not announce itself. It did not need to. It began with a shift in rhythm guards, changing pace, footsteps misaligned, silence breaking in places it should have held. Ronan felt it before it happened. His wolf reacted first this time, not in fear, not in submission, but in warning. A sharp internal signal that something had crossed a boundary it was not supposed to cross. "Move," Ronan said instantly, turning slightly toward Lena without hesitation. The word had barely left him when the first blade appeared. Not from outside the chamber, from within it. Steel cut through air with precision aimed not at him but at her. The strike was not random. It was intentional, targeted. Lena did not scream. She did not fall back. She moved not fast in panic, but controlled, as if she had already understood what direction danger would come from before it fully revealed itself. Ronan intercepted the attack mid-motion, arm striking with brutal force that sent the attacker crashing back into the stone floor. The sound of impact echoed sharply, but there was no time to confirm identity. More movement followed. Not one assassin. Not two. Multiple. From within the palace guard itself. The realization landed harder than the attack. Betrayal was not coming from outsiders. It was already inside the structure that was supposed to protect the throne. Lena stood still at the center of it all, no longer untouched by chaos, but not consumed by it either. Her gaze lifted slightly, not in panic, but in calculation, as if she was finally seeing the shape of the truth forming around her. And Ronan, for the first time since becoming Alpha King, was no longer certain if the enemy was trying to kill his bride, or trying to prevent what she would become if she survived. The palace did not recover from the attack. It only learned how to pretend it had. The silence afterward was heavier than before, not peaceful but watchful, like something unseen had taken residence inside the walls. Ronan stood in the center of the aftermath, his coat still marked by the chaos that had unfolded only moments earlier. But his attention was no longer on the fallen assassins or the shaken guards. It was on her. Lena stood a short distance away, still surrounded by tension that no one dared fully acknowledge. Her posture had not changed, her expression had not cracked, but something about her presence had shifted in a way that could not be ignored anymore. It was subtle at first, a change in the air around her. Not visible light, not magic in the way the elders would describe it, but something deeper, like the space around her, had begun to acknowledge her differently. Ronan's wolf reacted immediately. Not with fear this time. With recognition that did not belong to memory he could access. Lena's hand lifted slightly, almost unconsciously, as if responding to something internal rather than external. A faint pulse moved under her skin, barely visible, but undeniable to those who knew how to look beyond the surface of things. One of the nearby guards stiffened. "Did you see that?" he whispered. No one answered him, because most had not, or chose not to. Lena frowned slightly, her voice quiet but uncertain. "It's happening again." Ronan stepped closer immediately. "Again?" he repeated sharply. That word mattered more than anything else she had said since arriving. Lena hesitated, then looked down at her own hand as if it no longer fully belonged to her. "It reacts when there is death nearby," she said slowly, as if testing the truth of her own words while speaking them. "It always has." Ronan's expression tightened. That was not normal. Not even for wolves. Not even for bloodlines known to carry unusual traits. Something deeper was at work. Something that did not belong to any known structure of their world. His wolf stirred again, but this time it was not uncertain. It was alert, and beneath that alertness, something closer to recognition than instinct. The council chamber had never felt smaller. Not physically, but in the way truth had begun to press against its walls. Ronan stood at the center again, but this time the elders did not feel like advisors. They felt like defendants without realizing the trial had already begun. The attack inside the palace was not external, one commander reported carefully. It came from within the guard structure. A murmur moved through the chamber, quickly suppressed. Ronan did not react immediately. His gaze remained steady, fixed not on the report, but on the people behind it. "So the system failed," he said quietly. The word failed landed heavier than expected. One elder straightened. "It was an isolated breach." Ronan's eyes shifted slightly. "Isolated?" he repeated. A pause followed. Not hesitation from him, hesitation from them. That distinction mattered. Multiple entry points were compromised. The commander continued, more cautiously now. Coordinated movement. No external signal detected. Ronan took a slow step forward. The sound of his boots against stone echoed too clearly. "That is not isolation," he said. "That is alignment." Silence deepened instantly. The elders exchanged subtle glances, but none of them spoke immediately, because alignment implied intent. Intent implied planning. Planning implied something far more dangerous than attack. It implied structure within their own system had begun acting independently of control. One of the oldest elders finally spoke, voice low and controlled but carrying strain beneath it. "You are allowing personal involvement to distort your judgment, Your Majesty." Ronan turned slightly toward him. "Personal involvement," he repeated slowly, as if testing whether the phrase belonged in this situation at all. Then his gaze sharpened. "Or awareness?" That question changed the room, not loudly, not visibly, but completely. Because awareness meant something else. Awareness meant seeing patterns others refused to acknowledge. Awareness meant questioning foundations that had been accepted for generations without examination. "Everything you are describing," Ronan continued, voice steady but darker now, "requires coordination that predates this incident." A pause, which means it was already present. No one spoke, because no one wanted to confirm what that logic implied. Somewhere deeper than the political structure, beneath ranks, beneath councils, beneath even the Alpha line itself, something had been functioning long before Ronan ever took the throne. And if that was true, then the system he believed he ruled was never entirely his to begin with. The upper corridor of the palace was quiet in a way that felt artificial now, not peaceful, controlled. Every sound below carried too far. Every silence felt like it had been placed there intentionally. Ronan stood near the balcony overlooking the kingdom, but his focus was not outward. It had turned inward long ago and had not yet returned. Lena stood behind him, not restrained, not guarded in this moment, but still not truly free either. The council's words lingered in the air between them even now. Contained, they had said. Monitored. Words that sounded procedural but carried intent beneath them. Ronan finally spoke, without turning. "They are afraid of you." Lena did not respond immediately. When she did, her voice was calm, but not passive. "No," she said. "They are afraid of what I confirm." Ronan's jaw tightened slightly at that, because that answer did not deny anything. It redirected meaning. A subtle shift, but one that mattered. "And what exactly do you confirm?" he asked. A pause followed. Longer this time. Not hesitation, calculation. "That something in your world was already unstable before I arrived," Lena said quietly. Ronan finally turned toward her then. Fully this time. Not as an alpha, not as a ruler, but as someone trying to understand a variable that refused to behave like one. "Or," he said slowly, "you are the reason it is becoming visible." Lena met his gaze without flinching. "Maybe," she said. That single word carried more weight than any denial could have, because it did not reject responsibility. It did not accept it either. It left space for truth neither of them were ready to define. Ronan's wolf stirred again, but not toward her, not against her. It stirred toward something beyond both of them, something larger, something hidden behind structure, behind prophecy, behind control itself. And for the first time, Ronan did not trust what his wolf was telling him, not because it was wrong, but because it might have been remembering something he had never been allowed to know. And that realization did not break him loudly. It broke him quietly, in the space where certainty used to live. The truth did not arrive like a revelation. It arrived like resistance, like something the world itself had been trying to keep buried for far too long, suddenly pushing back against silence. It began in the oldest section of the palace beneath layers of stone, beneath sealed corridors that even council members were forbidden to enter without direct alpha authorization. Ronan stood at the threshold of the archive chamber, unmoving, as the door before him was slowly unlocked by trembling hands. "This section does not exist in official records," one of the elders said quietly, voice strained, as if even speaking the truth of its existence weakened him. Ronan did not respond. He simply stepped inside. The air changed immediately. Not colder, not warmer, heavier, as if the space itself remembered things it was not supposed to. Rows of stone tablets lined the chamber, older than the current kingdom structure, older than the alpha bloodline records above ground. Lena stood behind him now, not ordered to be here, not forbidden either, simply present, as if something had pulled her into proximity without permission from either side. Ronan's eyes narrowed as he scanned the inscriptions. "This is pre-pack documentation," one elder whispered, "before the current ruling line." Ronan moved forward slowly. "Then why is it hidden?" No answer came quickly enough. That itself was an answer. When he finally reached the central tablet, his hand hovered above it without touching. Because even before contact, his wolf reacted. Not violently, not fearfully, recognizing something it should not have remembered. The inscription was fragmented, but one line remained intact enough to read. Not destroyer, not curse, not end. Ronan's gaze sharpened. "This has been altered," he said immediately. An elder behind him stiffened. "That is impossible." Ronan turned slightly. Nothing is impossible if it was written by those who benefited from forgetting. The air in the chamber tightened, because that possibility had never been spoken aloud before. And now it could not be unspoken. The deeper they went into the archive, the less it felt like discovery and more like exposure. Layer after layer of records had been deliberately fragmented, not destroyed completely, but broken just enough to prevent full continuity. A controlled loss, not accident, design. Ronan moved through the chamber with increasing silence. The elders no longer guided him. They followed him. Lena remained slightly behind him, her presence steady, but no longer passive. There was something different in the way she looked at the records, not as history, but as recognition trying to surface without permission. "The structure of the pack predates the alpha system," Ronan said slowly, reading a section aloud. His voice was controlled, but something in it had shifted. "That is not possible," one elder responded immediately. Ronan turned slightly. "Then explain why your records admit it." Silence followed. Not denial, not correction. Silence that avoided confirmation. He continued reading. "The first ruling order did not establish the pack. It replaced something. A pause. Something it could not erase completely." Lena stepped closer now, her eyes fixed on a symbol carved into the stone. Not recognition yet, something closer to disturbance. "That mark," she said quietly. Ronan looked at her. "You recognize it?" It was not a question. Lena hesitated. "No," she said, then corrected herself. "Not from memory." That answer mattered more than it should have, because instinct recognition without memory was not learned. It was inherited. The elders grew more rigid behind them. One of them spoke carefully, too carefully. "You are misinterpreting fragmented data." Ronan's expression darkened slightly. "No," he said. "I am connecting what you failed to keep separated." He turned back to the records. The pack was not built. It was rebuilt. A pause, which means it survived something. The silence that followed this time was heavier than before, because survival implied a previous collapse, and previous collapse implied inevitability, not accident, not prophecy, fate. The final chamber was not marked. It was not supposed to exist at all. Even the elders hesitated before entering, as if proximity alone might awaken something they had spent generations keeping asleep. The door opened slowly, revealing a circular chamber carved into black stone. At its center stood a structure unlike the rest of the archive, a single raised slab surrounded by fractured markings that looked less like writing and more like memory embedded into stone. Lena stopped at the threshold, not because she was told to, because something inside her refused to step forward immediately, Ronan noticed. "What is it?" he asked quietly. Lena did not answer at first. Her eyes remained fixed on the center structure. "I don't know," she said finally, but her voice was different now, less certain, less controlled, more human. Ronan stepped inside first. The moment he did, his wolf reacted again, but not as it had before. Not fear, not submission, not recognition, conflict. Like something inside him was being forced to choose between two truths it had been trained never to compare. The elders remained near the entrance, refusing to move deeper. That alone told Ronan everything he needed to know. "This is what you hid," he said quietly. No denial came, only silence. Ronan approached the central slab. The carvings here were intact, untouched by time, or deliberately preserved. His fingers hovered above them. "Do not touch it," one elder said sharply, voice breaking restraint for the first time. Ronan paused, then turned slightly. "Why?" No answer came, because the reason was not logical anymore. It was historical fear. He looked down again. The inscription was not a warning, not a prophecy, not a threat. It was a record, and it named something that should not have been named. A lineage, not of alphas, not of wolves, as they were known. Something older, something that predated dominance itself. Ronan's expression changed subtly as he read the final visible line. His grip tightened slightly at his side without him realizing. "Lena," he said quietly. She stepped forward hesitantly now, despite herself. Not because she was called, because something in her reacted to hearing her name beside that place. Ronan looked at her once, then back at the inscription. "This doesn't say you destroy the pack," he said slowly. A pause. "It says you were here before it ever became what it is now." The silence that followed was absolute, because that was not destruction. That was origin, and origin could not be stopped, only remembered. It did not begin as rebellion. It began as something far more dangerous inside a structured world like theirs, uncertainty that had no clear target anymore. The palace, once governed by hierarchy so rigid it seemed unbreakable, had started to behave differently. Not all at once, not loudly, but in fragments that spread like infection through obedience itself. Lena walked through the lower corridor beside Ronan, and for the first time since her arrival, the world did not move around her with quiet avoidance. It moved against her with hesitation. Guards no longer stepped aside immediately. They watched her longer than necessary. Their eyes lingered in places where respect used to exist, and calculation now replaced it. Not hostility yet, not open defiance, but something far more unstable judgment forming without instruction. Whispers traveled faster than footsteps. It's her. She was inside the sealed archive. The Alpha's wolf reacted. They are hiding what she is. The words did not need to be true. They only needed to spread. Because in systems built on control, perception becomes more powerful than fact when fear enters the structure. Ronan felt it before he saw it fully, the shift in alignment around them. Not one person, not one group, but the gradual recalibration of loyalty inside the same space he had ruled without question. A guard stepped aside too slowly. Another did not lower his gaze in time. A third tightened his grip on his weapon without realizing it. Lena noticed none of it, outwardly. But something in her awareness had sharpened. Not fear, not confusion, recognition that she was no longer being moved through the palace as a guest or a burden. She was being measured, and what they measured was no longer human. Ronan finally stopped walking. The corridor behind them fell into silence immediately, as if the entire structure had been waiting for that exact pause to decide what would happen next. Someone behind them spoke. She is the reason the council is unstable. The voice was not loud. It did not need to be. Ronan turned slowly. The entire corridor tightened in anticipation. "Say it again," he said quietly. No one did, because something in his tone had changed. Not rage, not dominance, decision. And that was far more dangerous than anger. Lena remained still beside him, but the air around her felt heavier now, as if the palace itself was beginning to decide whether she belonged inside it or had always been a contradiction waiting to be removed. And for the first time, the pack was no longer afraid of Ronan alone. They were afraid of what standing beside her meant. The council chamber was not designed for conflict. It was designed for resolution, a place where authority spoke and obedience followed without resistance. But that version of the chamber no longer existed. It had already fractured. Elders filled the elevated seats, but their unity was gone. Their voices overlapped instead of aligning. Their certainty had been replaced with urgency that no longer carried authority, only fear dressed as order. "This is no longer a political matter," one elder said sharply. "This is structural risk." Ronan stood at the center, still, listening, but no longer receiving their words as instruction. Lena was not inside the chamber. She had been kept outside under containment watch, a word that now felt less like protection and more like preparation for removal. But even separated, she remained the center of everything being discussed. "She destabilizes the Alpha's wolf," another elder insisted. "That alone is enough grounds for separation." Ronan did not respond immediately. Instead, he looked at them. Really looked. Not as advisors. Not as elders. But as something closer to pressure points inside a system he was finally seeing without blind loyalty. "You speak of instability," he said quietly. A pause. "Yet, I am the only one here whose power has not changed." Silence tightened instantly, because they knew he was right. And that made them more afraid. The oldest elder leaned forward, voice lowering. "You are not acting as Alpha." Ronan's gaze sharpened slightly. "That is correct," he said. The chamber froze. Then he continued. "I am acting as something you no longer control." A ripple moved through the room. Not visible, but felt. Because authority had always flowed in one direction inside that chamber, from elders to Alpha, from tradition to execution, from structure to command. And now it was reversing. Outside the chamber, Lena stood alone in the corridor. No escort, no chains, no protection that meant anything anymore. Just observation. The guards no longer looked at her the same way, not as prisoner, not as guest, not even as threat, as origin of something they could not categorize. Inside the chamber, pressure reached its breaking point. "She must be removed," one elder said again, louder this time, "before the pack fractures completely." Ronan turned slightly toward the sealed doors and spoke without hesitation. "No." The word did not echo. It ended discussion. A full stop placed inside a system that had never been told no by its own ruler. The elders stood slightly now. "You would choose her over the pack?" one demanded. Ronan's voice remained controlled. "I would choose truth over a system that fears it." That was the moment the chamber stopped being a council space and became a battlefield of ideology. It did not begin with war cries. It began with a mistake. A single guard misread silence as permission. His blade left its sheath. Not fully, not dramatically, just enough. And that was all it took for the entire system to collapse into motion. Because inside structures like this, obedience is not based on command alone. It is based on expectation. And expectation had just broken. The guard moved toward Lena. He never reached her. Ronan intercepted him instantly. The impact was not ceremonial. It was not restrained. It was absolute. The guard was thrown back into the stone pillar with enough force to silence the corridor instantly. For half a second, everything stopped. Not peace. Recognition that something irreversible had just occurred. Then the second movement came. Another guard drew weapon. Then another. Then another. Not coordinated rebellion. Worse, independent collapse. Each individual responding to fear instead of structure. The palace was no longer acting as one organism. It was breaking into instincts. "Stand down!" someone shouted from above. But the command did not travel the way it used to. It arrived too late. Ronan stepped forward, placing himself between Lena and the expanding chaos without hesitation. Not as ruler, not as alpha performing duty, as a line that could no longer afford to move backward. His wolf surged inside him again, but differently now. Not obedience. Not submission. Not fear. Conflict. As if even instinct itself could no longer decide which version of reality was true. Lena stood behind him now. Not passive. Not invisible. But aware. Fully aware. Because something inside her had begun to respond not to threat but to exposure. Not what she was. What they were becoming because of her. Above them, an elder's voice finally broke through completely. This is what the prophecy warned of. Ronan did not look up. He only spoke. Calm. Final. Controlled in a way that no longer belonged to obedience. Then it was never a warning. A pause. Only an excuse. Another strike echoed in the corridor. Not victory. Not defeat. Transition. Because the pack was no longer resisting Lena alone. It was resisting the collapse of everything it believed was stable. And Ronan, the Alpha King, who once ruled without question, was no longer standing inside that system. He was standing against it. With her. The moment the palace descended into open conflict, something deeper than violence began to surface. Not chaos alone. Not rebellion alone. Recognition that the structure holding everything together was no longer stable enough to pretend. Ronan stood at the center of the fractured corridor, motionless except for the controlled rise and fall of his breathing, while around him the pack collapsed into competing instincts. Some guards still hesitated, frozen between loyalty and fear. Others had already chosen fear. And Lena, standing just behind him, was no longer simply present. Something about her presence had changed again. Not visibly, not loudly, but in the way the air reacted. The corridor's torches flickered unevenly, as if disturbed by pressure no one could see. The stone beneath her feet felt different, though no one could explain how or why. Ronan noticed it first. Of course he did. His wolf was no longer reacting in fragments. It was reacting as a whole, fully awake now, fully alert, and fully unwilling to accept the old definitions of reality. "Stay behind me," Ronan said quietly. It was not an order. It was instinct. Lena didn't move immediately. That alone was new. Before, she followed. Now, she was deciding. "I am not the reason they are breaking," she said softly. Ronan didn't turn. "That is not what they believe," he replied. A pause. Then Lena stepped slightly forward anyway. Just enough. Not into danger. Into visibility. And the moment she did, every nearby guard reacted at once. Not coordinated. Instinctive. Weapons raised. Breathing changed. Bodies stiffened. Because something in her shift had triggered something in them. Not recognition of identity. Recognition of origin-level threat. Ronan's jaw tightened. Not at her. At the reaction. Because now, it was no longer about protecting her from them. It was about what she represented to them, without even trying. And that was far more unstable. Inside Ronan, something finally gave way. Not collapse. Not loss. Separation. His wolf no longer moved in sync with him. For the first time since he had taken the title of Alpha, the bond between command and instinct did not function as one structure. It felt like two beings sharing the same body but no longer sharing the same truth. "Enough," Ronan said internally, forcing control downward. But the wolf did not respond the way it always had. It did not obey. It did not resist. It questioned. A sensation Ronan had never experienced from within himself. The corridor around them erupted again as another group of guards advanced. But Ronan did not move immediately. His gaze shifted not outward but inward. For the first time, he was not only leading the situation, he was negotiating with himself. Lena turned slightly, watching him now. Not as Alpha, not as King, but as something unraveling in real time. "You feel it too," she said quietly. Ronan's eyes narrowed slightly. "That is not something I should feel," he replied. "And yet you do," Lena said. That sentence landed harder than any blade in the corridor, because it confirmed what he had been refusing to name. This was not external conflict anymore. It was internal contradiction becoming visible, and it was spreading. The council chamber doors burst open. Not ceremonially, not with announcement. They were forced. Inside, elders who once held absolute control now stood in disarray, voices overlapping, authority dissolving into competing fear responses. "This is because of the bond," one shouted. "It is the prophecy," another insisted. "No, this is contamination." But none of them agreed on the source anymore, because the source was no longer singular. It had become distributed, across perception, across belief, across loyalty. Ronan entered the chamber slowly, and the moment he did, silence attempted to form again. But it failed, because silence requires structure, and structure was no longer intact. He stopped at the center, looked at them, not as ruler, not as participant, but as witness. "You built everything on control," Ronan said quietly. An elder stepped forward. "On order." Ronan shook his head slightly. "No," he corrected. "On agreement that no one would question where control came from." That statement shifted the room. Not because it was loud, because it was accurate. And accuracy is more destabilizing than accusation. Behind him, Lena entered the chamber now, and the reaction was immediate. Not respectful, not ceremonial, fear-based alignment. Every elder instinctively repositioned. Not toward Ronan, toward her. That alone confirmed everything. Ronan turned slightly toward them. "You are not afraid of her," he said quietly. A pause. "You are afraid of what you forgot about yourselves." No one answered, because answering would require admitting memory loss at a structural level, and that was no longer acceptable in their system. It was already too late for correction. One elder finally stepped forward, voice shaking now not from age but from realization. "You are not supposed to stand beside her," he said to Ronan. Ronan looked at him calmly. "And yet I am." The elder hesitated. That was not part of the intended alignment. Ronan's gaze sharpened slightly. Intended by who? Silence. A dangerous silence. Because that question had never been allowed before. The elder lowered his voice. "The original order." Ronan stepped forward slightly. "There is no original order," he said quietly. "That is what you told yourselves, so no one would ask what came before it." A ripple moved through the chamber. Not fear this time. Collapse of certainty. Because if there was something before their order, then everything built on top of it was conditional. And if it was conditional, it could end. Lena finally spoke, voice low but steady. "Then the prophecy was never predicting me," she said. A pause. It was describing what happens when truth is no longer contained. Ronan looked at her, and for the first time since the beginning of all this, he did not disagree. The chamber no longer felt like a place of governance. It felt like a place where something long buried had finally been disturbed beyond containment. The elders stood in fractured formation, no longer unified, no longer certain who had authority to speak without consequence. Ronan stood at the center, but even that word center no longer carried the same meaning it once did, because something had shifted beneath all of them. Not in rank, not in law, in origin. Lena stood beside him now, not behind, not protected, not contained. Beside. And that alone was enough to make the entire room unstable. One of the elders finally spoke, voice thin with something between fear and disbelief. "You should not be standing there." Ronan did not look at him immediately. His gaze remained forward, fixed on the sealed stone structure at the far end of the chamber, the one they had avoided naming for as long as memory existed. "I've been hearing that a lot today," Ronan said quietly. A pause. "And yet, I am still here." The elder swallowed hard. "Because you do not understand what she is." That made Lena shift slightly for the first time. Not fear. Attention. Ronan finally turned slightly toward the elder. "Then explain it," he said. Silence. Not refusal. Collapse of prepared language. Because explanation required truth, and truth had not been spoken here in its full form for generations. The oldest elder stepped forward slowly now, as if every movement cost him something. His voice was lower than before, not authoritative anymore, resigned. "The pack did not begin as you were told," he said. That sentence alone changed the temperature of the chamber. Ronan's expression hardened slightly. "Start over." The elder nodded faintly. "We did not rise from nothing," he continued. "We were placed over something that already existed." A pause. "And then we renamed it." The chamber fell into a deeper silence than before, because that was not how history was supposed to sound. It was supposed to be heroic, linear, controlled, not built on replacement, not built on concealment. Ronan took a slow step forward. "Placed by who?" he asked. No immediate answer came, because that question was the edge of everything they had been avoiding for centuries. Lena's gaze remained fixed on the sealed structure ahead. Her breathing was steady, but something about her stillness had changed again. Less confusion now. more recognition pressing against the surface of awareness. The elder finally spoke again, by the first line. The words carried weight, none of them liked acknowledging. Ronan's eyes narrowed slightly. I thought that was a myth, a bitter, almost broken exhale from the elder. It was renamed a myth when remembering it became inconvenient. The chamber tightened. Not physically, structurally. Because belief systems do not collapse suddenly. They begin to lose support in specific places, and those places begin to crack first. Lena finally spoke quietly. The first line, she repeated. Not a question. As recognition trying to surface without permission. Ronan turned toward her fully now. You know that name, he said. Lena hesitated. Not denial, not acceptance. Conflict. I don't remember learning it, she said slowly. But my body reacts to it. That sentence did not make sense in traditional terms, but it made perfect sense in this chamber. Because they were no longer dealing with learned history. They were dealing with inherited memory. The elders stepped back slightly as the realization began to settle, not as revelation, but as confirmation of something they had always feared would eventually resurface. Ronan turned back toward the sealed structure. His wolf stirred again inside him, but differently now. Not reacting to Lena, not reacting to the council, reacting to proximity. Like something ancient, recognizing something it had been separated from for too long. You said the first line placed the pack above something, Ronan said quietly. The elder nodded. Yes. A pause. What was it placed above? Silence again. But this time, it was not avoidance. It was reluctance to reopen something sealed at cost. Finally, the elder spoke. The original wolves. The chamber reacted instantly. Not with sound, with pressure. Even the guards at the edges shifted instinctively, as if their bodies understood the weight of that term before their minds could interpret it fully. Ronan did not move, but something inside him did. Lena's fingers tightened slightly at her side. Not fear, recognition sharpening. The elder continued, voice now lower. They were not like us, he said. They did not follow hierarchy. They did not inherit dominance. They did not accept alpha structure. A pause. They were what existed before we decided order was necessary. Ronan's gaze did not leave him. And Lena? He asked. The question came calmly, but the chamber felt it immediately, because that was the only direction this was going. The elder hesitated for the first time, then answered. She is not from the pack line. Another pause. She is from what the pack was built to replace. Lena did not react outwardly, but the air around her changed again. And this time, even Ronan's wolf went completely silent. Not submission, not fear, recognition that had finally stopped hiding. The sealed structure at the center of the chamber began to feel closer, even though no one moved toward it. Ronan took one step forward, then stopped. Not because he was told to, because something inside him resisted the next step. For the first time since becoming Alpha King, his authority did not feel like certainty. It felt like inherited permission. And permissions could be revoked. Lena spoke quietly behind him. So the prophecy was not about destruction, she said. No one corrected her, because correcting her would require confidence. And confidence no longer existed in that room. Ronan finally spoke. Then what was it about? The elder looked at both of them now, not as ruler and subject, not as alpha and outsider, but as 2 points of something reconnecting. The prophecy, he said slowly, was never about ending the pack. A pause. It was about what returns when the original is no longer contained. Silence. Then Lena finished it quietly. Me. Not as claim. Not as pride. as confirmation. And in that moment, the chamber understood something no one wanted to say aloud. She was not an intruder in their world. She was a reminder of a world they had overwritten. And Ronan was standing at the exact point where both worlds could no longer remain separate. The moment Lena spoke the word "me," the chamber did not respond immediately. It hesitated, as if even reality itself needed time to decide whether what had been said was allowed to exist. Then the silence changed. Not broken, not shattered, rewritten. The sealed structure at the center of the chamber began to react, slowly at first. A deep vibration moving through stone that had not been disturbed in generations. Dust that had settled for lifetimes, lifted into the air without wind. Ronan felt it before he saw it fully. Not with his eyes. With his wolf. For the first time, his wolf did not speak in instinct or warning. It spoke in recognition so complete, it erased confusion entirely. Lena stood perfectly still, but she was no longer only standing in the chamber. Something inside her was responding to something inside the structure. The elder stepped back immediately. "No, not now." Ronan turned sharply. "What is happening?" The elder's voice broke slightly. "The seal is reacting to lineage proximity." That word lineage no longer felt like history. It felt like ignition. The stone slab at the center cracked faintly. Not violently. Precisely. As if something had been waiting on the other side of it for a very long time and had now finally been acknowledged. And then, the air shifted. Ronan felt it first as a pressure inside his chest. Not pain, not resistance. Removal. Something inside him that had always responded to command, structure, dominance, began to loosen its hold. His connection to the alpha identity did not break suddenly. It unraveled, a single thread at a time. His wolf did not resist it. It allowed it, because it was no longer recognizing the structure it had served. Ronan staggered slightly, one hand bracing against the stone wall without realizing it. "Ronan," one of the guards called, voice uncertain, but he barely heard it. His attention was no longer outward. It was inward. Something older than his authority was pressing against the edges of his consciousness, not to destroy him, to override what he had been taught to be. Lena turned slightly toward him now, and for the first time, he did not feel stronger standing beside her. He felt different, not weaker, not stronger. Rewritten. "You feel it now," Lena said quietly. Ronan's jaw tightened. "Yes." A pause. "And I don't know what it is." Lena's eyes did not leave him. "Neither do I," she admitted. But that was not the truth that mattered. The truth was that both of them were reacting to something neither of them had been raised to contain, and the system around them was beginning to reject it. The chamber collapsed inward with soundless intensity. Not physically, structurally. Reality inside the space began to fracture in perception, first walls seeming closer, distance becoming uncertain, air losing consistency. The elders could no longer maintain control of their own movements, not because they were restrained, but because the rules they followed no longer applied with certainty. The stone seal at the center finally split open, and what emerged was not a creature, not a body, not a single form. It was presence, a pressure of existence that did not belong to the current structure of their world. Ronan stepped forward instinctively, not commanded, not ordered. Drawn, Lena moved with him, not behind him, beside him. The elders dropped to their knees without realizing when the decision was made, because their bodies recognized something their minds were still refusing to accept. The first line was not a legend. It was continuity, and continuity does not die. It pauses, then returns. A voice not spoken through air, but through awareness itself filled the chamber. Not loud. Absolute. Structure built on replacement cannot contain origin. The chamber shook at the statement. Not physically. Fundamentally. Ronan's breath slowed. Lena's expression tightened slightly, not in fear, but in alignment. Because whatever was speaking was not addressing them as intruders. It was addressing them as confirmation. The elders tried to stand. Some could not. Some did. But none of them were stable anymore. Authority had stopped functioning as identity. Ronan looked around the chamber slowly. For the first time, he saw it clearly. Not as alpha, not as ruler, but as participant in a structure that had been operating on inherited illusion. This was never a kingdom, he said quietly. The voice that filled the chamber responded, not answering him directly, but acknowledging the statement. Correct. Lena's voice was barely above a whisper. Then what is it now? A pause followed. Then the answer came. Correction. Ronan's eyes narrowed slightly. And something inside him, something that had been alpha for as long as he could remember, finally stopped resisting the truth fully. Because it was no longer about power. It was about origin resuming its place where replacement had existed too long. Lena exhaled slowly. Not relief. Alignment. And the final realization settled over everything at once. She had not come to destroy the pack. She had come to restore what the pack had overwritten. And Ronan was no longer standing above it. He was standing at the threshold of becoming part of what comes after it. The chamber did not return to what it was. It could not. Even after the presence of the first line faded from immediate perception, the space remained altered, as if reality itself had been rewritten and was still adjusting to the new shape of what it now contained. The elders who once ruled through certainty were no longer speaking. Some stood in silence. Some had already fallen to their knees without resistance, and some simply could not meet the air where authority used to exist. Ronan stood at the center of it all, no longer feeling the weight of the alpha title in the same way. It was still there, but it no longer felt like ownership. It felt like inheritance from something that had already been questioned. His wolf remained awake inside him, but it no longer moved with the same obedience to old structure. It was quieter now, not weakened, reorganized. Lena stood beside him, not behind him, not below him, just there. And that alone was enough to make everything that had once defined hierarchy feel incomplete. The final remnants of resistance inside the chamber did not come in the form of rebellion. They came in the form of realization, the kind that arrives too late to be stopped and too early to be fully understood. One of the elders finally spoke, voice strained, almost unrecognizable compared to the authority it once carried. If this is correction, what happens to us? The question did not echo. It dissolved. Because even the chamber no longer belonged to them in the same way. Ronan looked at the broken seal at the center of the room, not as a threat anymore, not as a mystery, but as confirmation that the world he had ruled was never the complete version of itself. I don't think it's about what happens to you, Ronan said quietly. A pause. I think it's about what you stop pretending you are. Lena finally looked at him directly. Not as alpha, not as anomaly, but as someone standing at the same threshold she was now fully aware of. What are we now? She asked. Ronan did not answer immediately, because for the first time in his life, answering would require letting go of every definition he had ever been given. Behind them, the chamber remained unstable, but no longer collapsing. It was settling into something unfamiliar. Not destruction, not restoration, transition. And somewhere beyond perception, the first line's presence no longer felt distant. It felt observant, as if waiting for the next decision, not from rulers, but from those who had survived being rewritten. Ronan finally spoke. Not what they named us. A pause. Something they failed to finish defining. Lena's expression softened slightly, but her eyes remained sharp. "Then they will come for us again," she said. Ronan nodded once. Yes. No hesitation. No doubt. Because truth always attracts resistance before acceptance. And this world was not finished resisting yet. But it was already too late to return to what it was before. If you made it this far, then you already know this was never just a story about an alpha king or a cursed bride. This was the moment a hidden world started to break its own rules. And what comes next is not peace. It is consequence. Because if the first line is truly back, then everything you just saw was only the beginning of something far bigger than this kingdom. Now I need to know what you think. Do you believe Ronan made the right choice standing beside Lena, even if it destroys everything he was built to protect? Or should he have obeyed the pack, no matter the cost? Tell me in the comments. I actually want to read your take on this. And if you want the next part where the first line's return doesn't just change the pack, but rewrites the entire world of wolves as they know it, then don't just watch quietly. Hit like so I know you're here. Subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. Because this was not the end. It was the moment everything started over.